What's going on, sports fans? Welcome to the Off the Dome Sports Podcast. If this is your first time watching, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe here on YouTube, as well as follow us on X at @OffThe_Dome Pod. My name is Bryce, also known as Redfish here on OTD, and today we're going to be talking about our top 10 fantasy football tight ends. If you love fantasy football like we do, make sure to check out our full fantasy series, as we've talked about our top 10 quarterbacks, running backs, and receivers, as well as guys we think may overperform from their ADP or finish under that mark. If you love sports content nationwide or even right here where we're from in Louisiana, make sure to check out the No Network. That's KNEAUX, the only way to spell it. The No puts out fantastic content on YouTube in the form of podcasts and short interviews, as well as on the website where you can check out written articles by some of the No's content creators. If you love content and you love sports, I promise you'll love Off the Dome and you'll love the No. Make sure to follow the No at Be in the Know on all social media platforms, as well as follow us here on YouTube and X @OffThe_Dome Pod. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into our top 10 fantasy football tight ends. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Off the Dome Sports Podcast, your favorite sports podcast where two, but sometimes three, sports lovers sit and give their hot takes
Off the Dome.
I'm Redfish.
Lionel Frankenstein here.
And I'm Rebo Hustle.
And today we're continuing our fantasy football streak here, and today we're going to be talking about top 10 fantasy football tight ends. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead. I'll start us off. Number 1, Sam Laporta. Finished as the tight end 1 last season. Nothing changed for him. Ben Johnson is back as the OC after getting some head coaching candidate looks. Jared Goff just got an extension at quarterback. Amon-Ra St. Brown is the main piece on that offense. And then you still have David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs in the backfield to take some pressure off. So, obviously, Sam Laporta is going to be a very good player this season. I don't think there's any doubt to that. I think the only downfall you can really find with Sam right now is that his ADP is a little high. I think he's going at like 207, and he also had 10 touchdowns last season. So, you can't necessarily depend on double-digit touchdowns from a tight end. You can't depend on him having the same production, especially him going in the middle of the second round. You're kind of losing some opportunity cost there on either Josh Allen at your quarterback 1, if you want to stick with that onesie position, or an elite wide receiver or running back as well. So you have to have the right squad. I think you have to have the right roster build to get Sam Laporta, but I don't think that's an issue. I mean, Sam Laporta is guaranteed, in my opinion, to be a top 3 tight end. And consensus here in the Off the Dome studio, we have him as number 1 after what he put up last season as a rookie.
Yeah, I mean, the tight end position is so weird in fantasy football because if you don't get one of, like, the big elite guys, then you're really kind of just banking on whoever's with, one of the more explosive offenses. And in Laporta's case, you're in the best of both worlds. I mean, I'm excited to see what he does in his sophomore season because he really broke the mold rookie year.
Yeah, a guy that kind of breaks the mold and is the number 1 receiver on his offense and also is a value week to week. We know that he's consistent, and that's Mark Andrews. He's their main touchdown scorer, even with Derrick Henry coming into the Ravens. The problem with Mark Andrews and why a lot of people had him a little bit lower, and I think he's going as tight end 4 off the board, is his health. But we know if Mark Andrews is healthy, he's easily tight end 1 or 2, no matter what. But that has to do with the risk of taking somebody who sat out more than half the year last year, for being honest. And I think personally I'd take that risk just because I've been a huge fan of Mark Andrews since he was at Oklahoma. And that's kind of, they don't have another guy in that room that can fit the same mold. Isaiah Likely is their tight end 2, but I can't see him getting many reps with Mark Andrews healthy.
Yeah, as long as Mandrews stays healthy, it's hard to think that he won't get 9, 10, 11, 12 targets a game from Lamar because they have such a built chemistry over the years. And not only do they have a chemistry and they don't have, a surefire wide receiver 1, he's a really good player. And typically what you want in fantasy football, Lionel already talked about it, is a really good player on a really good offense. And last year we saw the Ravens make a push at the Super Bowl. They finished the regular season as the number 1 seed in the AFC, and Mark Andrews wasn't even healthy for that. So you're telling me you put Mark Andrews and Derrick Henry on an offense that already was winning 14 games? I'm really excited to see that offense, and I think Mark Andrews can be a big part of it.
Yeah, as a proud dynasty fantasy owner of Mark Andrews, it's been really nice having him on my team. So I think we have another good year ahead of us for the Andrews stands. But moving on to number 3, Mr. Travis Kelce. It feels so weird to not see Kelce at the top of a tight end rankings list.
Yeah.
it's unlike anything we've seen in the last 8 years, as long as Kelsey's been around. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and every episode we've done so far, we've talked about an underrated and an overrated guy. I'm going to jump in with Travis Kelce being my underrated player, which sounds kind of crazy to say about a player that's going at the 2-3 turn. But being drafted as the tight end 2 in fantasy football, I think this is the best value by far that anyone who wants Kelce on their team is going to find. I mean, he still showed the ability to be dominant. If you look at the NFL playoffs last season, not the fantasy football playoffs, but the actual NFL playoffs, the main reason why people kind of look at Kelce and see a drop-off in production is a lack of touchdowns last season, only scoring 5 with his last one in Week 11. By far the most surprising stat I've seen in a while. I think going into 2024, the Chiefs tried to address their receiver room, adding Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown. We'll see what happens with Rashee Rice, but Travis Kelce is still the alpha. Like, he's still the number one guy. He's going to demand attention. And I think if you can snag Travis Kelce at the 2-3 turn, I mean, he was drafted top 5 in almost every league last season. And maybe that's what it is. People are kind of burned by, burning an early pick on Travis Kelce and it not panning out how they hoped. But I think if you can get him at 213, which is his ADP right now, that's a steal by the end of the season.
Yeah, and that's based on a 14-team league that Rebo Hustle and I are part of. So, if you think about that, if you're in a 10-team league, 12-team league, he's slipping to the top of the 3rd round. So if you're a team who likes to invest in the onesies, whether that be a quarterback or a tight end, and you see Kelce there and you had the first pick and you were able to secure CMC and one of those elite wide receivers, on that in the bottom of the 2nd round, and you feel comfortable, go ahead and grab Travis Kelce there. We know what he does on the NFL field. He's going to score touchdowns. He beats zone coverage like no other tight end. He finds his way to sit in the zone and is always the safety valve for Patrick Mahomes, and I think that's something you can't overlook is how much trust he has in that Chiefs offense that has won back-to-back Super Bowls.
Yeah, and I think he's in my opinion, he's underrated. Being he was the top 5 fantasy pick last year overall, and so as Adam was saying, it's the best value by far that you've ever gotten on Travis Kelce, and so I'm willing to swing on a guy who I've known consistently has been a top 1 tight end.
Yeah.
And this year you can get him as your 2 or your 3.
Yeah, I mean, the touchdown drop-off last year was noticeable. But I think it's really being overblown that Kelce has lost a step because he finished as the tight end 3. Whoa. Yeah, that's crazy.
Exactly.
A man who has consistently been the tight end 1 for the last 8 years dropped down a couple spots. Oh, no. He's done for.
Yeah. And you still look at that Chiefs offense. I mean, Pacheco's going to score his touchdowns on the ground, but Rashee Rice, we don't know when he's going to play. Marquise Brown, we don't know. You don't know what he's going to be like. He could be Ravens Marquise Brown, where he looks like he's, the next man up, or he could be the Cardinals Marquise Brown, where he's barely on the field, and when he is, he's overshadowed by rookies like Michael Wilson. So, Travis Kelce really has high opportunity and is going a little bit later than normal. So if that's a guy you want to invest in, go ahead and do it. For me, one of my favorite players, we'll do our My Guys episode next week, and he was very much in consideration for a My Guy this season, and that's Trey McBride. I think talent-wise, he is probably top 2 or 3 on this list of tight ends, up there with Sam Laporta. He's young, he's got opportunity, and he's a darn good player. Kyler Murray coming back, being healthy, I think is going to be a big thing for him. If you look at last season, from week 10 on, he averaged 10 targets per game. If you're telling me a tight end gets 10 targets per game, I want him on my team. Because like we talked about earlier in the episode, tight ends are no sure thing in fantasy football. If you don't have a top 6, 7 tight end, you might as well just stream them every week. You're telling me I get a tight end who's 24 years old, kind of had a mini breakout last season, is going to be playing with a healthy quarterback, and doesn't have a ton of receivers to kind of balance out his targets when, you have Marvin Harrison, but Zay Jones is their wide receiver too. So Trey McBride's going to have a lot of opportunity for catches. He's going to have a lot of opportunity for touchdowns, and he's playing with who was our number 10 quarterback. So if he's in a good situation like he is, he's young, he gets a lot of targets, I think this might be the year where Trey McBride cements himself as a top 5 tight end, not only in redraft, but in dynasty, because he is such a young player. He's going to be a really good player from here on out. I really like Trey McBee this year.
No comment. I have zero opinion on Trey McBride this year.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I'll jump in real quick because I'm very thankful for Trey McBride and Sam Laporta and the guy that Rebo is about to talk about in a second here, because they have added some variety to the tight end group for fantasy football. Before it was, if you don't get Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, or George Kittle, you kind of just picking from the rest of the bunch. It's those guys and then everybody else. But now with the injection of youth into the tight end position, it's a really nice spot to be in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, you look at our top 10 tight ends, I think 5 of them are going into year 4 or less. I mean, Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, Pitts, Jake Ferguson, all really young players. Ingram's not too old yet. I mean, Andrews, Kelce, and Kittle, of course.
Andrews only going
older guys,
6 years.
But yeah, I mean, Andrews feels a lot older than he actually is. Kelce and Kittle are really the only two who are on the upwards of 30 there. So you've got a lot of youth in the tight end position, and we do a lot of dynasty leagues on our own, so we enjoy dynasty football as well. So the tight end position is one that's really fun for that format.
Yeah, and moving on to our number 5 tight end, Dalton Kincaid, a guy who is an absolute my guy. Like, I love Dalton Kincaid. The only problem is he's going as tight end 5, and so I just don't feel like I'm getting a little bit of a steal. But also like the draft capital that you have to invest in order to get a lower end top 5 tight end. Like, he's not going to finish number 1 by any means, but there's a possibility that he can end anywhere between 3 and 5. But you're looking at Stephon Diggs is out of Buffalo. Kincaid kind of becomes your premier pass catcher. He had, I believe, 91 targets last season. It's easy to see him have 91 catches next season. It's just because of pure volume, and there's him being so young going into his sophomore year. Sophomore seasons normally are very good for any position in the NFL, and I really feel like that's why Dalton Kincaid is likely to break out this year.
Yeah, I hope he does, because I really like the Buffalo Bills offense. I just feel like they desperately need some legit pass catchers, because they draft Keon Coleman, but do we really?
We love Curtis Samuel.
Do we really?
Oh, I love Curtis Samuel.
He loves Curtis Samuel.
Yeah, you might be on the.
We is a strong statement.
I think you're alone there, bud, but that's okay. I just don't have a whole lot of faith in the receiver room, so this is a huge opportunity for Dalton Kincaid to step in. And I kind of view it a lot like the Mark Andrews, Lamar Jackson situation. I mean, you got a quarterback who can run the ball, but very clearly can get it done through the air too, and needs a number 1 guy. And I think that's where Dalton Kincaid falls in.
Yeah, I mean, Kincaid, when he was coming out of college, he was viewed as kind of like that slot wide receiver tight end role. And I mean, you look at the guy we're going to talk about next, he's similar to Kyle Pitts in build. I mean, Pitts is a little bit heavier and an inch taller, but Kincaid has that same kind of prowess, and he's a very, very good player. Kincaid was my favorite tight end coming out of that class. I remember I compared him to a young Zach Ertz with his receiving threat. I really like Dalton Kincaid. He's one of my favorite players I've seen in the past few years. It's awesome that we had McBride and Kincaid back-to-back, because those are 2 of my favorite players in the league. But I love Dalton Kincaid, and like they talked about, I mean, opportunities are insane on that Buffalo offense. Stephon Diggs is gone. Kincaid may be the number 1 target from what many people view as an MVP favorite every single year in Josh Allen. Not only that, but you look at what he did last year as a rookie. Even with Dawson Knox in that room, Kincaid is a 24-year-old, 7 top 12 finishes. And at the tight end position, if you're getting over half of your weeks or top 12, that's consistency that you need in that room. So I think his boom is almost as high as anybody on this list. So if I have the opportunity to get Kincaid in the 5th or 6th round, I might take him.
Yeah, so moving on to number 6, Mr. Kyle Pitts. I feel bad for any of the Kyle Pitts truthers who have been around the last few seasons, and odds are they probably jumped ship. They probably fell off the train because it's been a rough ride. But this year, I think, is the one where Kyle Pitts really steps in to the dominant idea that was floated around about him around draft time.
Dominant's a strong word. I'll
Look,
throw that out.
It might be, but it is one of my favorite words. Mr. Kyle Pitts is going to be incredible for fantasy football this year. I really think the addition of Kirk Cousins and the removal of Mr. Arthur Smith, just running the ball and trusting Jonnu Smith more than Kyle Pitts, which is just insane in my opinion. I know Rebo might have a little bit stronger feelings on Jonnu.
Jonnu Smith.
That'll be saved for next week.
Ooh, spicy. But yeah, I'm really excited as a fantasy football fan to see what Kyle Pitts does in this newly formed offense. But as a Saints fan, kind of like our discussion of Drake London last week, I am not looking forward to being terrorized.
Man, that Falcons offense, and listen, we hate the Falcons. I can't speak for them too, but it's my least favorite team without a doubt. As a Saints fan, I hate the Dirty Birds. However, if you look at all of our fantasy rankings episodes, running back, receiver, and tight end all has a guy in the top 10. That Falcons offense is going to score points. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and Kyle Pitts is going to be a big part of it. If Raheem Morris can come in there, he brought in Zach Robinson from the Rams. If Zach Robinson can learn how to use Kyle Pitts, I mean, I'll pose a question to y'all. Don't you think Kyle Pitts can be used in the same way as Puka was? Like, I don't think not necessarily a deep, like, there's...
Well, he is anti-Puka, so
He is
we'll let
anti-Puka.
him...
But Kyle Pitts is only 2 inches taller. He's only 20 more pounds.
Okay.
Coming out of college, Kyle Pitts was drafted, number 6 in that draft. He ran like a 4.5 as a tight end. He's got a huge wingspan. He was known for being a deep threat at Florida. Like, he has everything in his toolbox to be good. He just hasn't had the situation yet, and I think this might be the situation for him. So, Kyle Pitts right now is going at the top of the 5th round in ADP. So, if you feel good and you're like, hey, I got 2 running backs, I got 2 receivers, and there's no quarterbacks there who I feel heavily invested in, grab Kyle Pitts, and you might finish with a tight end 1 this season.
Yeah, I mean, if I can jump in real quick, the Kyle Pitts to Puka connection is a little... I don't know if I'm fully on board that, but I would think maybe they would use someone like Darnell Mooney, similar to how they use Puka. I know. Look, well, that's the exact
Tulane
reaction
legend.
I was...
Come on now.
What's that?
Tulane legend.
Darnell
sure.
Mooney's 5'9", Puka's 6'2". I don't want to hear it.
So, I mean, I feel like they play similarly. Puka's not a deep threat. But, I mean, having that exact reaction is what I was hoping for, because I have zero faith in anyone not named Drake London in that receiver room. So that's exactly where Kyle Pitts steps in to be that number 2 to the potential alpha of Drake London.
I will say, as much as I looked away, I think Kyle Pitts is the guy that I would gamble on most as a receiver in this offense. The problem is yes, Kirk Cousins can walk right now, but how healthy is he going into the season? Who's their starting quarterback week 1? We know Kirk Cousins might take over later on. But that offense has the potential to be so high-powered. That's why, as much as we hate the Falcons, there's one guy in every position group that we're willing to take a shot on, because I'm willing to take a shot on one of them per team. Like, I'm not taking multiple. They're not that
Oh, yeah,
good.
I'm not triple stacking.
Well, like, I'm not saying that don't take all of them, but, like, I'm not going to be like, oh, the best available running back right now is Bijan, and the next round Drake London slipped all the way to me. I have to get both of them. That's not the case with the Falcons. This offense has so much potential to be high powered. You might want to get a little taste, and so that's why we have them ranked the way we do.
Absolutely. For me, this is kind of the last guy I would have as my I really want him. Like, I would go out of my way to get this guy, and that's number 7 on our list, George Kittle. George Kittle is about as volatile as you can get at the tight end position. Even though he's older, he still has games where he goes for 8 receptions, 120 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Like, his game can be, I'm going to block all game and get 2 receptions, or it can be, I'm having a George Kittle day. As somebody who's had George Kittle the past 2 seasons in fantasy, with this guy, we have loved it some weeks and hated it others. He has won us weeks by himself, and he has also scored 1.2 points. So it really depends on team build for me, what you do with George Kittle. Right now he's going in the middle of the 5th round, so a little bit after Kyle Pitts. But he's going to score points at least 5 times a year. He's going to score double-digit points. There's no doubt about that. You just have to prepare yourself for his down weeks as well. I think, like I said, the tier break here, Evan Ingram is a guy we'll talk about next. I would definitely take George Kittle above him just because the boom of George Kittle is going to win you a week, and I don't know if we get that from anybody below him on this list. That's why we put him at number 7.
So I'll talk about Kittle real quick because I want to pose a question to you guys. So
here we go. I love a question.
A lot of the volatility with Kittle is because that 49ers offense is just absolutely stacked. And, this week might be a Kittle week, but next week he scores 1 point because Debo went off. And the next week it's an Ayuk game. So how far does Kittle move up in the rankings if either Debo or Ayuk is traded before the season starts?
I think with Kittle, with the way his job works in the offense, it doesn't matter who the receivers are. It doesn't matter if Ricky Pearsall and Debo are out there or if it's still Debo and Ayuk. I don't think that just because there's less talent out on the outside, his numbers go up or down, because he plays his role and that's what he does, and he does it probably the best out of anybody in this entire list. And that's just why he's where he's at, because he's George Kittle. Like, that's period, point blank. There's nothing else to say about him. And it doesn't matter who else is in the offense, in my opinion.
I really like the way you put that. I was kind of thinking the same thing. Yes, they have unlimited weapons on that 49ers offense. Debo, Ayuk, CMC in the backfield. Elijah Mitchell is a capable running back. As a backup, you still have Jawan Jennings, who almost won Super Bowl MVP because of his work in the Super Bowl. And then they drafted Ricky Pearsall at the end of the first round. So tons of talent for the 49ers. But because of Kittle's role and what he does, not only from a receiving standpoint, but from a blocking standpoint, he's going to be on the field every play. And he's just, as Lionel likes to say, he's just got that dog in him. So I don't think it matters who's on the team. I think Kittle plays his role well. I think Kyle Shanahan knows what he does, and I think that no matter what, Kittle will not be outshined, and he will also not be the number one receiving option. So he'll always find his middle ground, and be that, volatile guy that you never know what you're getting.
Yeah, that's fair. I posed the question because I guess I'm more on the other side of it, where unless I'm remembering it wrong, when Kittle would have his boom weeks, it was at a time where one of or both of the Debo or Ayuk connection were missing time. So if they permanently miss time by switching teams, does that really catapult Kittle into less volatility and just more dominance?
See, I do see where you're coming from, but I think that with the other guys they have in the room, and the ability for the 49ers to play to their competition in the sense that they can really change their scheme however they want and still win football games. Because we saw them win games where they scored 17 points. We saw them win games where they scored 40 points. I think they have a great coaching staff, and drafting Ricky Pearsall, having Jawan Jennings in that room, they have a lot of room to switch around pieces. So I don't think you have to depend on Kittle every week to get you a win.
Yeah, I think the boom from Kittle in those weeks just has to do with late scratches. We didn't necessarily know that Ayuk would be out the entire week. And so the offense is going to change more to, I already have plays drawn up to get Kittle the ball. I'm just going to call more of these this week. And so I think if you have an entire season of it, I don't think his role will really change.
Okay, sick. Yeah.
But moving on to Evan Ingram, one of the guys that I believe might be the biggest mover on this list at the end of the season. Kind of a real value pick because he's going as about tight end 8 in fantasy drafts. That offense got worse. We know this. Calvin Ridley's gone. There's a whole lot of random secondary receivers in the wide receiver rooms. But Evan Ingram's kind of been a consistent tight end 6 and up the past 3, maybe even 4 years, especially since he's been on the Jaguars. I think that he might be the strongest to make a case as a top 5 tight end from the guys on the bottom 5 of this list. But yeah, I think that he has all the potential in the world and will continue to do that, even in year 6.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Evan Ingram was a great draft steal that I had in one of my leagues last year. So I'm in on Evan Ingram. I like him. I'm, I guess, a little less bullish on the Jaguars' offense as a whole. I think Evan Ingram will have a solid year, though.
Yeah, I mean, tight end 8's perfect for him. I think 2 years ago was his first year with the Jags, if I remember correctly. And he finished right around tight end 8. Last year, tight end 2, 114 receptions. For me, that's just not repeatable. And he also I don't believe he has the boom potential of certain guys above him, like Kyle Pitts, Kincaid, McBride, Laporta. He doesn't have that you're never going to see Ingram having 8 receptions for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns. But if you saw Laporta do that, you'd be like, oh, man, that's why I got him. I think Ingram, like Rebo Hustle said, great value pick where he's going. He's going as tight end 8. He's going to offer more consistency than a guy like George Kittle or Kyle Pitts. I just don't think he has the upside of those guys. That being said, I'll give my thoughts on the Jags offense next week because I have a little bit of a different thought than these two guys. That being said, though, Ingram, I mean, he's the constant from last season to this season. With Trevor Lawrence getting that extension and bringing in new guys with Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr., a guy we love as LSU fans, Evan Ingram will remain constant, and I think there's no way he finishes outside the top 10. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Barring injury, we'll put it that way.
Oh, yeah, obviously. So moving on to number 9, big old Jake Ferguson. And I kind of view Jake Ferguson almost like a Sam Laporta light. Like, he's in an offense that is high-powered, but there's a very clear alpha in that room. For the Lions, it's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, it is.
And then, I'm sure you're so excited. But
My Lions, baby.
The Cowboys obviously have CeeDee Lamb. Ferguson finishing at tight end 9, I think, is the most perfect spot for him just because it's consistent. He's not going to absolutely break the game of fantasy football, but he's also not going to give you dud weeks just because that Cowboys offense is so elite. So I think there's room for him to really make a squad go.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've touched on your underrated guy already, Lionel. I think I'm going with Jake Ferguson here. Just a guy that just feels so good to draft as he's going as like tight end 11 in most leagues. I mean, you're like, oh, I've got backup wide receiver or a backup running back, and I've already got my quarterback. I can probably he just falls to you every time. It feels amazing, and that's a guy that just off of touchdown potential, there's no way that he will finish below tight end 9.
Yeah, similar to Ingram, great value pick. Last year, 100-plus targets on a Cowboys offense that we know is going to score points and get yards, which you want from your tight end. I think he did finish in the top 10 50% of the time last season. So kind of like we talked about earlier, you want that consistency from the tight end position. And that's not something you can get with a lot of these guys, but you can get it with Ferg. So him being your underrated guy, Rebo, love that. Because of the consistency, you could see him sneaking up to the 6 or 7 spot because he doesn't have the volatility that Kittle has or Pitts has or, even an unproven guy like Kincaid or McBride. Ferguson's going to give it to you every week, and, he might not have the boom potential, but he definitely has a high floor, and you got to love that when it comes to the tight end position.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we were talking about earlier about if you don't get a top 4 or top 5 tight end, you kind of just almost want to bet on consistency, and that's why we weren't as bullish on George Kittle being a boom or bust type of situation, whereas 8 and 9 and Ingram and Ferguson are going to be consistent enough to at least give you 10 points a week and round out your lineup.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the point that I made earlier because I specifically made that point so that I could bring it back up, and I completely forgot. So thank you for saving the connection there. But if you guys don't have anything else to say about Ferg, I'll jump in with David Njoku here. We have him as our tight end 10. That's where he's being drafted right at the start of the 7th round. But I'm going to go ahead and label him as my overrated player, mostly because I don't believe last season is I don't think he can replicate it because the majority of the production that when he really exploded for fantasy football was with Joe Flacco under center. Now, he's had some chemistry shown with Deshaun Watson. It's just not nearly the hyper targeting that Joe Flacco was dealing with. Last season, Njoku was the 3rd most targeted tight end, only behind Evan Ingram and T.J. Hawkinson. So is that really replicable? I don't think so. Plus, they not the sexiest name, but they add Jerry Jeudy to the offense, and you still have to deal with Deshaun Watson, who has shown that it can be rough at times. I just don't trust the Cleveland offense to really give you the boom potential as some of the other guys that are in better offenses on this list.
Yeah, I think Njoku can be one of my most underrated guys in the league, period, just off of a player talent standpoint, not necessarily from a fantasy football standpoint. But yeah, like you said, with Flacco targeting the tight end, Watson was targeting Amari Cooper, and that was when he had the best part of his year. And so it would be interesting to see an entire season of Njoku's connection to Deshaun Watson and how that would go. It's more of a bet on a guy who has the ability to finish as a top 10 tight end, not necessarily what's been proven.
Yeah, I think last season was definitely an outlier, and if he repeats it again, good for him, but he's no sure bet, like we think the 9 guys above him are. So I'll go ahead with my overrated. It's a guy that actually was just mentioned by Lionel in his explanation of David Njoku, and that's TJ Hawkinson. Now, I love TJ Hawkinson. As a player, I think he's fantastic. He's still a lot younger than people think, kind of similar to Mark Andrews. I mean, he's really hasn't been in the league as long as people think he has. If he was healthy, he would not be in my overrated category whatsoever. However, tore his ACL in the last 3 weeks of last season. So he's no guarantee to play at the beginning of the year. And, I haven't heard much about his injury update at all. Right now, his ADP is at the beginning to middle of the 8th round. He's going before guys like Dallas Goedert, Dalton Schultz, Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet has finished as tight end 7 2 years in a row. And he's not a guy who even made our top 10, so he could sneak in there. But similarities between all 4 of those guys, Goddard, Schultz, Kmet, and Hawkinson, is they're on offenses who have 2 receivers who are guaranteed to get more targets than the tight end. Not only that, but they're on offenses that have receiving backs as well. Saquon Barkley going into Philly, we know he's going to catch passes. Joe Mixon was a guaranteed receiving back in Cincinnati every season. And then DeAndre Swift moving from Philly over to Chicago, we know he's going to catch passes as well. So TJ Hawkinson, I think he's just going too high. We don't know about his injury situation. We don't know about the quarterback situation. He could have Sam Darnold or he could have J.J. McCarthy. Don't love either one of those options. And then if he does come back healthy from an ACL, he'll start off slow, and we don't know his role in an offense where Jettas, Addison, and himself are all healthy, as well as Aaron Jones there now to get those short yardage targets. So I think there's too much to go around in an offense I don't expect to be very good. So it's kind of hard to believe that TJ Hawkinson will live up to his ADP.
Yeah, I mean that hurts to talk about because I also really like TJ Hawkinson. And I think if he were, fully healthy and not dealing with, torn ACL at the end of last year, I think we're talking about him at tight end 4, right behind those big 3.
I think I've had TJ Hawkinson in at least one league every single year since he's been in the NFL. Like, legitimately, I love TJ Hawkinson, and every year I buy in on him. This year, I'm just not so high.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can really buy in at an ADP of 805, not into a player that probably won't play deep into the first half of the season.
Right.
We were talking before we started up this episode, potential things you could do with Hawkinson. I would like to see him as like maybe your last pick if you've got an IR spot in your league. Throw him on there, and maybe if you build a good enough squad throughout your draft and waiver wire pickups during the season, you get towards your fantasy playoffs, and now you've got an elite option there at tight end that can step in and ride it to a championship. Another thing we talked about was just making him like a mid-season waiver pickup. When the rumblings start, to come out of the Vikings organization, that they're ramping up TJ Hawkinson's snaps during practice. He's getting ready to get back. That's when you got to strike before that all really starts to break out, because other people are going to have the same idea.
Yeah, I like the idea of selling backup tight end and like stealing him at the end of a draft just to put on your IR, and then going search the waivers for a backup tight end if you still need one. Just because we don't even know if he's going to play at all. And so to invest a huge draft capital like in the 8th round of a draft, it's kind of just unacceptable.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the 8th round, that's where you're getting your wide receiver 3. That's where you're getting your running back 3. That's kind of where you're getting your starting tight end if you don't get one of those top 6 or 7 guys. So to invest in a guy who's not healthy, not in a great offensive situation, and we don't know what he's going to do, it's just high draft capital. I'm not saying I'm not touching TJ Hawkinson, but in situations like we talked about where you can grab him towards the end of the draft. I mean, if you're there in round 11 and Hawkinson's there, take a shot on him. Grab him, put him on your IR, pick up another tight end. If he's there in the last round, put him on your roster and let him sit for the 6-7 weeks that he might be out. It's just ADP-wise, I can't take him there and invest in somebody who I don't know what I'm going to get.
Yeah, and then my overrated guy also has an ADP issue. He's getting drafted as tight end 9. and that's Brock Bowers. We saw some rare things out of rookie tight ends last season, finishing in the top 10. I just don't believe that the Raiders have figured that out. I mean, they took the number 1 tight end last year, Michael Mayer. He didn't pan out. Yes, Brock Bowers is astronomically more gifted than Michael Mayer is as an athlete, but it's still the problem that we had last week talking about wide receivers is who's throwing the football in Las Vegas. And I don't even know if that's a game of if it's Gardner or Minshew, I like it more. And if it's O'Connell, I'd like it less, like we are with Devontae Adams. Whereas with Brock Bowers, I don't know if I like it at all, no matter who's throwing it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, if Jake Ferguson is Sam Laporta light, then I think Brock Bowers could be Jake Ferguson light.
Ooh,
where
the double light, you say?
Except the offense is not good, and neither is the quarterback. But there is still that as he's getting older, maybe not as productive. Devontae Adams is still the alpha of that team. Like, he's still going to demand targets. That takes away from Brock Bowers. And when you're in a quarterback situation like the Raiders are in, I really don't know if the targets that Brock Bowers is going to get are going to be all that worthwhile.
I don't know if this stat's true or not, but Aiden O'Connell, had like the 3rd worst target percentage as far as like throwing on target passes to his receivers. Was just missing receivers left and right. I mean, he was a 5th-round pick. You can't expect much from him. And not only that, but like you said, Devontae Adams is in that receiving core. Jacoby Myers finished as a wide receiver 2 last season in fantasy football, believe it or not. And then not only that, but Antonio Pierce is the head coach, and he is going to run the ball 250 times a year. Zamir White, whether you like him or not, is going to get that ball a lot. Dylan Laube is going to get the ball a lot. So, the Raiders are a running team. They invested heavily in Brock Bowers after getting Michael Mayer last year, so maybe they go 2011 Patriots and have a 2 tight end set every single play. But I don't see Brock Bowers working out this season. I think he's a great long-term investment, but this year in the Raiders, I don't see it. So I appreciate your overrated pick of Brock Bowers. You guys have already covered your underrated guys. Lionel, you took Travis Kelce. Rebo, you took Evan Ingram, right? Is that correct?
Big
Ferguson.
Big
Jake Ferguson. And I'm going to go with a guy who we haven't mentioned at all, a guy who's not in the top 10, a guy who's going at tight end 17 towards the late part of the 10th round, Luke Musgrave. Now, the reason I think Luke Musgrave can be a slam dunk at tight end 17, especially when you're picking him at late in the 10th round, last year he only played 10 games in the regular season. Of those 10 games, 4 of them were top 12 performances. Like we talked about with Dalton Kincaid, who put up 7 top 12 performances in his 17 games. If you can get some consistency at the tight end position, you're going to want that. And then something we've harped on in all the guys we've talked about so far, you want a guy who's getting opportunities in a high-scoring offense. The Packers are going to score points. I mean, you saw it last year in the playoffs. They scored, 38 on the Dallas defense that was supposed to be one of the best defenses in the league. So if you get a healthy Luke Musgrave, who was one of 2 tight ends they drafted last season, but definitely stood out above Tucker Kraft. You put 3rd-round draft capital into a tight end last season. He's coming back this year. He should be healthy. He had 4 top 12 performances in 10 weeks, and then he's going to a situation where Jordan Love is going to throw touchdowns, 30-plus touchdowns. I would expect the 6'6" red zone threat that is Luke Musgrave to get a handful of those. And if you can guarantee me that once every 2 to 3 weeks he's going to get a touchdown, that's 6 points right there. 7 points in a PPR league. So he's a guy you can stash on your bench and put in on a week-to-week basis. And in most leagues, he'll probably be there on the waiver wire. So if I have a chance to get Luke Musgrave as my backup tight end, I think he has high boom potential and can kind of cement himself halfway through the year as a matchup play and maybe even beyond that. If you're telling me that Luke Musgrave finishes as tight end 10 this year, I could definitely believe that, and I think he has the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, I like the Luke Musgrave attention. When we're putting together these lists, we put together individually our top 15 at each position and then average out to get our consensus top 10. So I think I had Luke Musgrave at tight end 13.
I like that.
I could have moved him up a little bit more, but I don't know if there's a receiver room in the NFL that's filled with more of just every guy is the same The Packers, I mean, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks. I feel like I'm forgetting another name.
Jaden Reed.
That would be it. That's a big one. I feel like they're all the same player. Obviously, that they have different play styles, but when it comes to fantasy production or their ceilings, I think it's all just around the same. So I worry that, and I think you throw Luke Musgrave right into that mix. I wonder if in the case of the Packers, because we want high scoring offenses, is Jordan Love really the only piece that truly can be game breaking? Maybe not game breaking, but help you to advance in your season. Because just everyone else on that Packers offense seems so the same.
Yeah. And to speak on that point, that's why I think that's a reason I actually like Luke Musgrave, to believe it or not, because you don't know what you're going to get. You don't
it's
know.
betting on upside.
Yeah, absolutely betting on upside. And for me, Jaden Reed, although, I mean, I think he's pretty much the wide receiver one on that offense, in my opinion. Christian Watson, we know, is not going to play a full season. Dontavian Wicks could be good, could be bad. He's kind of the wide receiver 4, and Romeo Doubs, we know, is an inconsistent player. So I think there's a lot of room to cement yourself in that Packers offense, and I think that's kind of why I like Luke Musgrave, because if you tell me you have those 5 options, I'd put Luke Musgrave as my number 2 as far as ability to lock in yourself as a high-end option on a high-end offense. I don't trust that room at all other than Jaden Reed. So I think Luke Musgrave has an opportunity to really cement himself and just prove himself as not only one of the better young tight ends in the league, but a really good option on a really good team.
Yeah, I think personally I would feel best if Jordan Love was the only Packer starting on my team. But I agree with what you're saying, and Luke Musgrave being a backup. Like, I'm okay with one of their receivers being my backup receiver and just hoping that the week I need him to be good, he's going to be good. Just because the Packers play more of almost a high school football brand of offense, and it's not necessarily just throw it to the best guy every time. It's whoever's open is open, and Jordan Love plays that role consistently and is one of the best to do that and spreading the love of an offense. That was pretty good, Jordan Love.
Ooh, it clicked.
But yeah, I mean, that's just how Green Bay has been doing it the past 2, maybe even actually since Jordy Nelson probably retired.
Yeah,
they haven't had a consistent wide receiver that was in the top 10. And so I think that's just how I'm okay with any of the Packers individually being on my bench. I don't feel okay with him as a starter. And you're saying taking him as upside as a backup tight end, which would be awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sorry, did you have more?
No.
All right, so if we consider Luke Musgrave at where I had him at tight end 13, I typically play in 12-team leagues, so that puts him right as a high-end tight end 2, with upside. You guys are in your big money league with a 14-team league, making Luke Musgrave a tight end 1. If you guys left your draft, would you feel comfortable having Luke Musgrave as your tight end 1?
Negative.
No, I think for me, although I'm high on Luke Musgrave and I think he's underrated, I'd rather have Cole Kmet or Dalton Schultz, one of those guys I talked about earlier, as my tight end 1, because
more established.
Yeah, they're more established. They're more consistent. They're going to get you probably 8 points a week, 6 to 8 points a week. Whereas Luke Musgrave, when he gets a good matchup, I'll throw him in to the starting lineup and see what I can do. And everything in fantasy football depends on who you get before those guys, right? Team build matters. You don't want a fully high volatile lineup. If you're picking Luke Musgrave, you better have somebody who you think can be more consistent above him. But that being said, I think upside-wise, you have to bet on it, especially with a young offense like the Packers. So that's, I think that's a really good point of depending on team structure, how many teams are in the league, who else is drafting in the league, because you have to know, who else is in the league and how they draft. That's where you take the road of, do I want him as my tight end 1? Would I rather wait and see if I can make him my tight end 2? Those are personal decisions that you have to make in fantasy football. And I'm glad we get to talk about this and have these discussions.
Yeah, I think we had some good talks today, guys.
Yeah, and this was an episode we were not super excited for because it's tight ends. Like we said multiple times throughout this episode, if you don't get a top 6, 7 guy, kind of feels like you can just stream them every week and get the matchup. But I think they leave room for consistency. They leave room for volatility, and maybe the tight end is the difference in your league. If you're playing a team where you feel you're an even matchup through your backs and your receivers, and maybe you're both streaming defenses. Maybe that tight end's the different position that you need. So if you invest and you get high upside, you'll feel really good at the end of the year. I know a lot of people did with Sam Laporta last season. You may do that with a guy like McBride, Kincaid, Luke Musgrave, tons of guys this year. So if you like this episode, if you liked what we talked about, make sure to go check out our channel. We've got wide receivers uploaded. We've got running backs. We've got quarterbacks. And then next week, our My Guys episode. So make sure to check that out as well. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe here on YouTube. And again, come back next week where you can hear our My Guys. We'll give 2 My Guys and a deep sleeper, a guy who may be going in the last round or completely undrafted that you're going to want to check out in your fantasy football drafts. I'm Redfish.
Lionel Frankenstein.
And I'm Rebo Hustle.
And we will see you next time.